let's get started. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're taking a close look at Chapter 7 Sic of BNS 2023. Offenses against property.
Sounds intriguing.
It is. It's this whole web of laws, all about protecting our possessions.
Right. It really gets at how society views things like ownership and fairness, don't you think?
Absolutely. Think about it. We've all panicked when we've misplaced something valuable, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But Chapter 7 Sic goes beyond just losing something. It lays out what happens when someone intentionally messes with your stuff.
It's fascinating how it breaks down what seems like simple acts, like take theft. Most people think, oh, you take something that's not yours.
Yeah, seems straightforward.
Right. But legally, it's way more nuanced than that.
Okay, so break it down. What makes something legally theft?
Well, it has to be dishonestly taking movable property out of someone's possession without their consent.
Okay.
And you have to intend to do it. That last part is really important.
So intention matters. So if I, absent-mindedly grab your coffee mug, thinking it's mine,
Yeah.
that's not theft. But if I see, say, a nice gadget just sitting there, and I decide to borrow it permanently,
I see.
that's crossing the line.
Exactly. It all comes down to intention. Accidentally taking something isn't theft, but if you purposefully take something from someone, even if you haven't physically removed it yet.
Oh, interesting.
If you hid that gadget in your bag, that's still theft.
Chapter 7 actually has some really great examples of this. Remember the one with someone luring away a valuable dog with bait?
Yes.
Or that other scenario with the a bullet carrying treasure? So it's not just about grabbing something. It's about manipulating the situation for personal gain.
Totally. And then it gets even trickier when you think about situations where someone thinks they have consent, but they don't, legally speaking.
Okay, like what?
Well, say you borrow a rare comic book from a friend without asking.
Assuming they'll be cool with it?
Right. You might genuinely think they wouldn't mind. But according to Chapter 7, if you then sell that comic for profit, that's criminal misappropriation.
So good intentions don't always equal legal protection.
Nope.
Okay, let's move on to something a little more, shall we say, intense. What about extortion?
Extortion. You're talking threats, coercion, that kind of thing. Basically using fear to force someone to hand over their property.
So it's not just taking it, it's making them give it to you out of fear.
Exactly. And, Chapter 7 actually categorizes how serious the extortion is based on the threat.
Okay, how so?
Well, threatening to spread a rumor about someone is one thing.
Right.
But threatening them with physical harm or making false accusations about them to get what you want.
Wow.
That's way more serious.
It's a whole different level. Speaking of upping the ante, what about robbery and dacoity? Chapter 7 covers those too, right?
Yep. Both involve taking property illegally, but there is a key difference.
All right, I'm listening.
Robbery involves violence or the threat of violence, and that threat has to be immediate.
Immediate, okay.
Like someone using force to grab a purse or threatening someone to make them hand over their wallet.
So if I threaten to spill a secret unless you give me your car keys, right now.
Yep, that's robbery.
And dacoity.
Dacoity is robbery, but with at least 5 people involved.
Oh, wow.
Think like an organized gang doing a heist.
Got it. Okay, so we've talked about taking things by force or threat, but what about situations where someone is trusted with property and then abuses that trust?
You're talking about criminal misappropriation of property and criminal breach of trust. Chapter 7 have a whole section on those. It really shows how important trust is when it comes to our belongings.
So if a friend asks me to hold on to something valuable for them and I decide to, say, pawn it for cash, that's criminal misappropriation.
Exactly. You were trusted with that property, but you took it for yourself. Criminal breach of trust is broader. It's any violation of the terms of that trust, like, say, a financial advisor who gambles away their client's money instead of investing it.
So it's about betraying the responsibility you have when you're entrusted with something.
Right. And that leads to another interesting question. What happens when someone ends up with stolen goods?
Is that where receiving stolen property comes in?
You got it. Chapter 7 is clear. Knowingly buying, having, or even helping to hide stolen property.
You're in trouble.
It's a crime, even if you weren't the one who stole it.
So even if I buy a super cheap designer watch from some shady guy,
oh, yeah,
I could be in trouble.
If it seems too good to be true.
It probably is.
Exactly. And looking the other way doesn't excuse you. You're still part of it.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Before we move on, there's one more offense I'm curious about. Cheating.
Cheating.
Yeah, it sounds kind of childish, I guess. But I have a feeling Chapter 7 takes it pretty seriously.
Oh, absolutely. We're not talking about, like, cheating at a game.
Right.
This is about intentionally deceiving someone to get their property or cause them harm. Think like selling fake goods, forging documents, or tricking someone into a bad financial decision.
So if I convince you to invest in my guaranteed to get rich quick scheme, that would be cheating.
Definitely. And that's a great example of how Chapter 7 covers a huge range of offenses, from simple theft to these complex, manipulative schemes.
It's pretty amazing how much ground it covers.
Yeah.
This has been eye-opening so far. We've gone from basic theft to, well, all sorts of stuff. But we've covered a lot, and I think it's time for a break.
So you were saying before the break that Chapter 7 covers all kinds of offenses. It's not just about straight up taking stuff.
Right. Like, what about situations where someone damages or destroys property? Is that in there too?
Absolutely. Chapter 7 calls that mischief.
Mischief. That sounds almost, I don't know, playful.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? But legally, it's about intentionally causing damage or loss to someone's property. And it has to be intentional. We're not talking about accidents here.
Okay, so like, if I spill coffee on my roommate's rug,
Yeah.
that's not mischief. Unless I did it on purpose, I guess.
Right, right. Unless you can prove it was intentional, it's not mischief. But if you, say, took scissors to that rug because you were angry,
Ah, okay.
that's a different story.
All right, so what kind of acts count as mischief? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, Chapter 7 lists all sorts of things. Burning important documents, contaminating someone's water supply, even intentionally running a ship aground to steal its cargo.
Wow, it covers a lot of ground.
It does. And the punishment depends on how much damage was done and the intent. Like, was it a genuine accident or did someone set out to cause harm?
So it's not just about what happened, but why it happened.
Exactly. And of course, things get more serious when someone's actions put people in danger.
Right, of course.
Like setting a building on fire or messing with safety equipment. Chapter 7 has harsher punishments for those kinds of things.
Makes sense. You don't want to mess around public safety. Okay, so you've got theft, extortion, all those offenses about trust, and now mischief. Anything else in this chapter?
You know, there is. It also talks about criminal trespass.
Trespassing, isn't that like just wandering onto someone's property?
It can be. But Chapter 7 then gets pretty specific. It talks about different types of trespass, each with its own rules.
Okay, I'm listening. What kind of types are we talking about?
Well, there's something called lurking house trespass. It's about secretly entering a home or a place of worship or a place where stuff is stored. Like if someone's trying to sneak in unnoticed to commit a crime.
So like picking a lock on a storage unit in the middle of the night.
That's a good example. And then there's housebreaking, which is more about using force to get in. Chapter 7 actually lists 6 different ways someone can commit housebreaking.
6 ways. Wow.
Yeah, like breaking a wall to get in or forcing a door open or even coming down the chimney.
It's like they've thought of everything.
They really tried. And of course, the punishment is worse if someone breaks in at night or if they have a weapon.
Right, makes sense. Breaking into someone's home is a lot more serious than just cutting through their yard.
Exactly. And it's even worse if the trespasser is trying to hurt someone or commit another crime like theft.
So it's not something to take lightly.
Not at all. It's important to remember that violating someone's property rights can have serious consequences. And it's not just about punishing people. It's also about preventing crime and keeping people safe.
Okay, so we've covered theft, extortion, all those things about trust, mischief, and now criminal trespass. I'm starting to see why this chapter is so long.
I know, right? It's
Yeah.
like a crash course in everything you shouldn't do with someone else's stuff. But wait, there's more. Chapter 7 also has some stuff about fairness in transactions.
Fairness in transactions.
Yeah.
Okay, what's that all about? Fairness in transactions. Okay, what's that all about?
Well, think about it this way. Say someone's deep in debt. They might try to hide their assets, you know.
Oh, so they don't have to pay what they owe.
Exactly. Like they might transfer ownership of their car to a relative or stash some valuables somewhere secret. But Chapter 7 makes it clear that's not okay.
So you can't just hide your stuff to avoid paying your debts.
Right. The law wants to make sure creditors get a fair chance to collect what they're owed. And speaking of fairness, Chapter 7 also deals with people who create fake documents or use tricky tactics to get an unfair advantage in property deals.
So like what? Forging a deed to a house.
Exactly. Or lying about, say, the size of a property to jack up the price.
Wow. So this chapter really does cover a lot. We've gone from simple theft to all sorts of complex schemes. And it's not just about physical stuff either, right?
You got it. It's about protecting intangible things, too, like financial interests and contracts. It really shows how much society values protecting what people own. It makes you wonder, how do these laws apply to the digital world, with things like beta, online identities, cryptocurrency?
That's a good question. Does Chapter 7 have anything to say about that?
Well, it's a tricky area. Technology changes so fast, and the law is always trying to catch up.
Right.
But even though Chapter 7 was written before the internet and all that, the basic principles still apply.
Like what?
Well, ideas about ownership, consent, deception, harm,
Yeah.
those are still relevant today.
So even though it doesn't specifically mention things like data breaches or NFTs.
Yeah. The core ideas about protecting property rights can help guide us in the digital world. It's like we have this legal framework to work with.
That's actually pretty reassuring.
It is. It means we're not starting from scratch. And it also shows how important it is to stay informed and think critically about situations. Protect yourself, whether it's in the real world or online.
I like that. So even though Chapter 7 might not cover everything in our digital lives,
Right.
the fundamental values are still there.
Absolutely. It's about fairness, preventing harm. Those are the core principles.
This has been an amazing deep dive. It feels like we've barely scratched the surface of Chapter 7, but we've learned a lot.
I agree. It's fascinating to see how the law tries to protect individual rights while also keeping society running smoothly.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up our exploration of Chapter 7-8. We hope you found this deep dive insightful and maybe even a little bit thought-provoking. Until next time, stay curious, and as always, thanks for joining us.